Um, so
Yeah, I can't hear you.
no, I'm not speaking. I'm
Oh,
reading.
sorry.
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 Yeah, it's my problem. I should have said something. I'm just thinking about my first question because um, you said 10% of violent extremists have mental health issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell me that again? And also, how does that compare to the general population?
Okay, so in my experience of all the radicalized detainees and violent extremists which I have seen in prison, I'd say that 10% or a little less than 10% have a serious mental health issue, such as schizophrenia, delusion, psychosis, or a severe addiction problem. Um, that would compare to maybe 3-4% at most in the general population. So you do have more people who are violent extremists who have a mental health problem, I mean a serious mental health problem, than the general population. But that's still much less than the total sum of all radicalized and violent extremists. Most of them do not have health problems. It doesn't mean they don't have psychological problems. They may have problems, identity issues, migration, broken up families, growing in a foster family. But even though that is a mental health, it is something from which they suffer. It's something which is difficult to live with them, but it's not a mental health disease such as psychosis or schizophrenia or another one or such like this.
Do you feel that people think they have got mental health issues more than they do? Do you feel that people think there's a higher amount? What is your point of view there?
Many people will say that they don't feel well from a psychological point of view. They feel stressed, they feel depressed, they feel anguish, but they will also recognize that they don't have a mental disease, that they don't have a severe mental health problems. People generally know the difference between a psychiatrical problem and just psychological distress. Those actually who would not make the difference are precisely people who do have a severe mental health problem. Somebody who's schizophrenic, when his disease starts, he won't necessarily be conscious of the fact that he has a problem. Usually, it's when he will be have hospitalized, when we have the treatment, when he will be followed by mental health professional for several years. After several years, he realizes he does have a disease, but at the offstart of his disease, of his problems, usually he's not aware of his problem.
I guess my question's around the idea that when you say that only 10% of violent extremists have mental health issues, is the argument that we have it wrong, often we have it wrong, we expect them to be monsters or mentally unhealthy, and they're not? Is that what your position is? Is it that the general stereotype is incorrect, that they are monsters, that they aren't human, that they are unwell mentally? Do you feel like we need to address some of these attitudes in general society towards extremists?
Yes, I do think that there is this general bias, this general belief, which is a stereotype, as you say, that people who commit extreme acts of violence, of radicalization, or whatever, of terrorist attacks, I think the general population thinks that they are monsters because, of course, in their daily life, they never see somebody who commits a violent crime. They never see somebody who commits a radicalized action or something like this. So they say, they're not from my daily life. They're not from the people I know. So they must be different. Different in the sense that, well, yes, since they did a crime, since they did something horrible, they must perhaps enjoy it, or at least they want to do it. They're happy with that. So being happy with committing a crime where you're not somebody normal, you probably have a disease, but disease or not disease, anyway, you're a monster. That's the general idea. I mean, I think it's a way in which people, they reassure themselves, thinking that none of the people I know, myself, we cannot commit something like this. It'll never happen to us. We'll never be the ones who do those horrible crimes, because we are normal people, and those who do crimes, who commit horrible things, are not normal. I think it's pretty much a way of reassuring each other. You know, it's like parents. I mean, every parent thinks my son will never do something wrong. He'll never go to jail. He'll never go to prison. It's the others who go to the sons of the others who go to jail because the others didn't raise them well. The others, they have drinking problem. They don't have any money. They don't have any education. So it's always the others who do things wrong.
And do you feel that the idea of the other is important here? Because you know, if you trickle down the logic that they're monsters and that they are mentally not well, then it's easy to start thinking about the community they come from in the same way. So you think, well, they're not human, they're different, and so Muslims are extremists, and Muslims are different, and is there a if we treat extremists as somehow different species, is there a danger that comes down into communities, that attitude? Do you see what I mean?
Yes, of course, because the general idea is that anything which is horrible happens outside of our community. Our community has value, has ethics, has proper moral behavior. In a way, the idea is that it cannot happen for someone who has been raised properly in our community. Something which goes wrong, it must come from the outside. There is this general idea that there are two ideas really which are deeply rooted in our Western psyche, in our Western collective stereotypes, representations of people. The first idea is that somebody who commits a crime is an enemy, but almost from a military point of view, he's an enemy. He's from the outside. He's kind of like a traitor. But he doesn't belong really to our country. He comes from he wants to destroy us. Who wants to destroy our country, our community? It's the enemy from another country, another culture, another religion. So there is this first idea that somebody who commits a crime is an enemy of the society. The second idea is that crime is a disease. It's something you catch from somebody. You know, this idea of the groomers who just groom people in order to commit a crime. The idea is not just that they convince them but that somehow they give them a virus, they give them a disease, they make them sick. So it's an enemy. He's a sick person. He comes from the outside, not from our community, which is healthy from a physical point of view, mental point of view, moral point of view. It's a very, very deeply rooted idea that somebody who commits evil is not from our community, is not in good health, is from some foreign land, from somewhere where they all are like that.
Well, I wanted to bring that into inside to our countries and our communities. And obviously, France is going through a difficult moment right now with this. And I wanted to just ask about, with the increased isolation and polarization due to COVID, is there a danger of an entrenchment of this idea of dangerous other communities? You know, we see these atrocities and then we think, again, we're very much more polarized and isolated. Is there a danger at the moment of how this manifests itself in different communities?
I think polarization is a real problem. To go back to one simple event, which maybe many people in England at least remember, is that in 2016, when there was the campaign for the Brexit, the candidate Boris Johnson at the time was speaking of those who were those who were against the Brexit as enemies of the people. Just like Donald Trump, of course, Democrats enemy of the people, the newspaper journalists enemy of the people. But in 2016, there was this campaign in England as people who were against Brexit were enemy of the people, which you probably remember led to the murder of the Member of Parliament Joe Cox by a 50-year-old man who had no history of radicalization, of political violence, of violent extremism, or whatever. It was this man was about in his 50s. He was influenced by the general polarization of the public debates, and even though he never was known for violent extremism, this polarization was really the straw which broke the camel's back. It was really the last thing which made him tip towards violence. And in France, unfortunately, I mean, people are very conscious that polarization is a big problem and may lead to even greater problems. And what is pretty reassuring in France these days is that there are many people even from the Catholic Church who denounce polarization, who denounce the stigmatization of religion. So it's a very helpful because it shows that it's not just Muslims who want to prove that religion is not something which leads to crime. It's also people from the religion who has been attacked, the Catholics, who try to show that even though they have been attacked, polarization is not the answer. It's the problem. It makes things much worse. So today we're really walking on a very thin ice on where this general idea that it's violent extremism, that's because of Islamism, is because of what happened in Syria, it's because of the jihad. There is this people who say that sort of thing. And on the other side, there are those who say, no, it's not religion per se, it's not religion itself which leads people to crime. And the fact that people from all religions say that, I think helps to prevent too much of a polarization.
And can you,
yes, it is a very big issue.
And can you just talk about it in the context of the COVID crisis, the fact that we are isolated from each other and how that can affect attitudes to each other as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, the COVID is really something which makes things much worse because, for one thing, it isolates people. So we have much less social interaction. So we are much less prone to going to see what happens on internet, on medias. And so we're much more exposed to fake news, exposed to social media who will give fake news. But I think the danger is much more subtle in the idea that for many people, extremism is a kind of a disease which is contagious. And what do we see? A disease, COVID, which is a virus which is very contagious. So in the mind of people, there is this kind of mix of the COVID is a disease, anybody can catch it, anybody can become infected by the COVID. Islamism is a disease. We see it on the internet, we hear it from the politician. It's a disease which anybody can catch, which is very contagious. So we have those two diseases, COVID, Islamism. Are they different? Are they the same? So people don't really know. They're very worried and they say, well, Islamism is pretty much like COVID. It can happen to anybody. Anybody can have it. We don't really know what it is. There are lots of information which are false, some which is right, but we don't really know. Scientists don't always have the same advices. So basically, we don't really know what to do. So we should be all the more careful and we should be all the more wary of all the others, of anything and anybody we do not know. We may go and hug our daughter or our father because we know he won't have COVID, but we won't go and see a friend, somebody we know, we won't go and shake his hand. A Muslim, which is a friend of ours, which we know we're not worried being with him, but a Muslim which we do not know, maybe he has this virus. So yes, this mix of the COVID and of polarization of radical extremism of violence, this mix is really makes things much more volatile, much more dangerous.
So what should we be thinking about doing to kind of, from your perspective, what do we need to be aware of, and how should we be approaching this problem in terms of your practice?
We should really try to understand that violence is not a disease. Violence is not something which you catch through an airborne virus. It's something which, of course, you should be aware of, but you must really understand that it does not work like a disease. even though in all the media, in all the newspapers, the television programs, on the radio, everywhere we hear this idea of terrorism, Islam, this disease of Islamism. No, Islamism is a political theory. It's not a disease. Violent extremism is a behavior. It's not a disease. So we should really try to focus on this, to not judge on a gut feeling, to not judge on an emotion. We should be able really to keep a rational, cool understanding of what goes on and really not mix things together, even though when you look at the medias, everything is totally mixed. I mean, you have a sequence on the channel about the COVID, 2 minutes after a terrorist attack in France or in Austria. 2 minutes after that, maybe we found a cure, but it did not work, so the COVID is still there. So, you know, the media, and I'm not saying they're doing this on purpose. I'm just saying that that's how they work. They give lots of short information, lots of short sequences, because they want to inform the public. It's probably a good idea, a good intention, but the way they do it is completely wrong, because it's not going to polarize things. In fact, it's going to mix them up. It's going to muddle them up. We don't know what is Islamism. Is it a disease or not? We don't know what COVID is. Is it a disease or not? Was it created by the Chinese or the Russians or the Americans? Maybe it's a political weapon. So maybe Islamism is not just a political theory. Maybe it's also a disease. Maybe COVID is not just a disease. Maybe it's also a political weapon. So how can we make sense out of all this, knowing that all those things are deadly? You know, so it's really important to understand that we should not react on our gut feelings. We should not react on our emotion. We should always remind ourselves that COVID is a disease, yes. Islamism, violent extremism is not a disease. It's a behavior which is linked to a political theory. And we should really understand that they do not work the same way. They're two things totally different.
But it also isn't it more that, I mean, as practitioners, we need to be aware of that narrative. I mean, I understand, you understand that being, you know, Islamism is a specific thing, and we all understand that COVID is a disease that was generated through a virus. But are you saying that as practitioners, we should understand that this narrative is taking hold, and that
yes,
we not so much? So what you're saying at the moment is this is the narrative, but I think what we need to say is, as practitioners, we need to be aware of this narrative, and we need to be able to work out a strategy to really counter that specific narrative that has grown in the last 6 months or a year. I wonder if you could talk about that. Not so much the narrative, but how we need to see the narrative as practitioners.
This narrative is really the root of the problem. It's the root of polarization, it's the root of violence, because this narrative is very appealing because it's very simple, but it's also very dangerous also because it is very simple. Its simplicity makes it very, very alluring, very ideal, makes it very, people are happy to understand. They're happy to understand, especially when it's something simple. But this narrative, which is very simple to understand, is also very dangerous because it is simple. So we must, as practitioners, be aware that the proper attitude toward a narrative, which is very simple and which is very, very alluring, which is very easy to understand, which people in a way like because they understand it. We must understand that we must not say, no, this narrative is wrong. Trying to counter the narrative just by saying that it's wrong is not efficient because people are not reacting to it from a rational point of view. They are reacting it from an emotional point of view. So what must be important to do is first to understand that this narrative, the general public has no idea that this narrative, has no idea what is dangerous about it, how it works. So the first thing we should do is that help people to assure themselves, not by saying them that this narrative is wrong, because if we tell them this narrative is wrong, they'll go and try and find another one which is just as simple and just as dangerous, which will also fit their ideas. So we must say, well, this narrative, yes, it's probably true in a small measure, so we can talk about it, but it's not entirely true. You must understand that this narrative is much more complicated than that. I think it's wrong to start to debunk the narrative by saying to people who are convinced of it that it's wrong. People cannot hear that because their gut feeling is it's right. So we should not say this narrative is wrong. We should say to people, you believe this narrative. Okay, let's work on it. Let's understand it. And I want to show you that this narrative is incomplete. It's not that it's wrong. It's just that you haven't understood all of it. This narrative is too simple. You're thinking something which is too simple about a problem which is much more complex than that. So, okay, let's take your narrative. You think it's right. Let's start on this basis. Let's say that this narrative is right. Let's try to understand what everything that's behind it. Let's unpack everything behind it. And let's understand that it's much more complicated than everybody thinks. And that actually, where it may be right in a small little way, but in the big picture, it's totally wrong. And it's at the big picture that we should look.
And then obviously one of the reasons these narratives take hold is because people are vulnerable and isolated, as we said before. I mean, you talked last time about the fact that we're going to face unemployment, isolation, lots of other problems are happening and will continue to happen. What kind of mental health challenges and issues do you feel that we're going to be facing in the near future in terms of COVID as a result of this crisis?
Where, as a result of the crisis, the main mental health issue we're going to face is depression. There are going to be lots of depressions. There are going to be lots of also, unfortunately, probably suicide attempts. So that's what really we should look about. We shouldn't worry about diseases such as schizophrenia, psychosis, or things like this. The general narrative around the COVID, around terrorism, is not going to induce this mental health disease such as schizophrenia or psychosis or delusion or whatever. That will not happen. What will happen is that it will induce lots of depressions. It may induce people who will try to commit suicide. It will induce problems, married couple will probably divorce, children will want to stop going to school, people will lose their jobs. There will be lots of problems like this. People may fall into addiction. Some people who have addictive problems, their addiction may get worse. So that's the kind of problem we should really be aware of.
And is there a worry that that would manifest in vulnerable communities? So we talked about attitudes to the other, polarization. Do you think these issues will impact some of the political arena and some of the things you're discussing now? Is there a relationship between these things?
Yes, there is clearly a relationship because all communities suffer from this situation, not just the vulnerable communities, even people in the so-called rich communities. I mean, people who are wealthy, people who have safe jobs, people who come from a happy family background, even those people are vulnerable. Everybody is vulnerable. And everybody is going to react in the same way. Everybody is going to fall back to his family, to his friends, to his community. But that is a normal and general reaction in a time of crisis. I mean, that's something we should not fight. It's something which is inevitable. So we should take into account that people are going to go back to their community. They're going to try to find reassurance. They're going to seek an understanding of the problems. So we should not have this idea that the person must not go to his community to try to understand what goes on. We should understand that he will do that, which is normal, but what he takes back from his community, from his family, from his friends, we should let him speak to us about it and try to understand what he took from it, how he understood it, what feeling it gives to him. Is he reassured because he talked to his parents? Is he all the more worried because he talked to his friends? Did he learn from his neighbors something which changed his mind on the COVID or terrorism, whatever? We should really try to understand how people react when they are in their community. But we should not try to change the communities because it's totally impossible, for one thing. And also, it's not the point. The point when we have crises like this, those pandemics, is that we should not try to deal with the community in general. We should try to deal with people who are in the community, because one person who will have a good understanding of the problem, he'll go and speak to 10, 20 people of his family, his friends, his neighbors, and each one will probably feel better and will be able to give the message to somebody else. And there will be a chain reaction like this. So I think it's more important to focus on a number of people who can give the proper message, with the idea that the message will spread through a chain reaction and will assure the communities. but you cannot change a community because the cultural identity, the links between the people, the emotional links are much too strong to be able to change them.
So with a retrenchment into communities, physically and emotionally, and in terms of support, more than ever before, probably more than contemporary history. I mean, does this have a knock-on effect for practitioners? Is it a total adjustment? Do we have to look at a different way of practicing? What's the advice on that? Where do we go from here?
I think that practitioners should not change their way of working, because the people they've met before the COVID, before violent extremism, they're used to having the practitioners work according to a number of rules, a number of habits, a number of catchphrases, a number of words or vocabulary. They're used to that. If we change all those habits, all those norms in which we work, the people who have the habit of seeing the practitioners will be completely lost, because they will think, well, usually the doctor used to ask me such and such question. He used to open the door in this manner. He used to invite me to sit like this. And now he does things completely different. And what is going on? I mean, I was safe with my doctor because he worked in a certain way which I liked. And he's working in a totally different way. So things must be very, very bad, very, very terrible if he changes his way of working. It's important to understand that when you're a practitioner in mental health, it's not just the words which you say which will help you to take care of the person. It's the way you sit in your chair, the way you open the door, the way you greet him, or the way your desk is organized. It's all those small details which are really the frame. It's the general frame in which the patient will feel safe. And so it's all the more important, because the outer world is changing, that we should keep our frame of work as strong, as permanent as possible, to not change it, because this frame of working is something which the people will feel reassured by. They will have this feeling of reassurance on saying, well, okay, COVID is a big problem, it's a disease, but at least it's not making the hospital change, it's not making the doctor change. At least it proves that some things will not change and something are safe, because they were there yesterday, they'll be here today, and they'll be there tomorrow.
And you said then, last time we talked, that at the beginning of the COVID crisis, it was very difficult in terms of being isolated from patients, but you learned to go out there and knock on doors and really just reestablish contact. Can you just tell me about that? How you've changed the difficulty at the beginning and how you've managed to adapt and be your professional self during this crisis?
Well, the great problem we had at the beginning of the crisis is that for health reasons, patients could no longer come to the hospital, or it was much more limited, or they were too scared to come. And in those totally new situations, it's not the words you're going to say, it's not the medication you're going to give, it's not the hospitalization which you're going to program, which is going to help the patient feel safe again. It's the fact that you're going to go towards him, you're going to see him, to have a human personal contact. It's the fact that you're going to reach out to him and say, well, yes, of course, we have this disease, things are very complicated, but the doctor is still here, the nurse is still here, we're still here to work on you. You can come and see us. We'll take all the necessary measures to make sure you don't become sick of the COVID. And we're going to help you through this time, which are very difficult. And to prove that we are still there, the best way to do is to go check on the patient. Give them a phone call, try and have a meeting on Zoom. For people who have mental health issues who will not come to the hospital, who cannot work with the Zoom, the best idea is just to knock at their door, just like you would do as a general practitioner. Go and see a child who is sick and who will not leave his bed. You just go toward the patients. I mean, when the patient cannot come to the doctor should come to the patient. That's a basic rule since thousands of years.
I mean, how has digital communication and digital technology helped you and your colleagues during this crisis?
digital technology has been a good help. It's not the perfect way to take care of people with mental health issues, but it's a second choice. It's not a bad choice. It's a second choice, which means that yes, you can work with Zoom, with technology, with all the medias. You can still keep in touch with your patients. You can still have a relationship with them. It will be far from perfect, but for obvious reason, it's better than not having any relation at all. So I think it's not the best choice. It's a second choice, but it's still nonetheless very helpful.
Okay, I think that's great. I think we covered loads. I think that was a more involved conversation than last time for me. I thought that was really interesting. I think we touched on more. The topics we covered now, I felt were more relevant in a way as well.
Where I guess it's like in theater when you have a rehearsal.
Yeah, exactly.
It's always better after.
And you kept your glasses on.
Oh yeah.
That's fine. That's great.
Hope they won't be too much of a glare.
Yeah, no, they'll be fine. I'm sure it's fine. We can we'll get around it. Okay, so we're going to do the weird bit where I say hello to you again because we're going to basically put this in. So let me just welcome you to. Thanks very much for joining us for the interview today. Nice to meet you.
Yes, well, thank you very much for inviting me. Nice to meet you.
Okay, so I'll just say a quick hello, and if you just say a quick hello back. So, great to meet you. Hello.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Great. And now I'm going to say my goodbye. Before I won't switch it off yet, but I'll say goodbye on your phone. So, thanks very much for joining us. Goodbye.
My pleasure. Goodbye.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to put my camera back on. That's the strange bit. That's the sort of TV bit where we pretend to say hello and goodbye. It's a bit weird, isn't it? That was really good. So yeah, I expect to see the clip, I hope, in the next day or the evening. Do you want to check it now?
Yeah, I'll send it right now. So yeah, hopefully, because the difference with the lights would be like where it's maybe Hollywood, not very.
Hollywood. Yeah, it's like Hollywood against bad English cinema.
Yeah. So I think the problem was probably the lights. So hopefully this time it will be better.
Okay. Well, we'll find whatever it is. We'll deal with it. But I felt like that was really interesting, and we touched on really interesting areas around polarization, vulnerabilities, and also the idea of the other. I think the idea of disease and kind of your conception of different communities is really interesting. I hope we can get a good bit of that into this. I thought it was really fascinating, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for your time.
No problem. Well, anyway, we're there's this lockdown, so I mean I'm at home. It's not a problem.
Okay.
Just like you, I suppose I'm pretty concerned about what goes on, and so I mean, if you want to interview me again, I mean, in the evening I'm home, so it's not a problem. I mean, it's
Gillaume, thanks for that.
I mean, things are really, really complicated. So if I can be helpful, I mean, it would be with great pleasure.
Thanks very much.
And just to be frank with you, it's not for the pleasure of being filmed and being on the internet, because I've already been on national TV, national radio, national newspapers. I mean, I've had my 15 minutes of glory, so I'm satisfied with that. So, but if it can be helpful, just feel free to ask for another interview.
Thanks very much. That's lovely to hear that. I'll speak to you again, hopefully soon. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope the clip will be fine. So I'll send it right now.
Okay. Thank you. Bye bye.
My pleasure. Bye.